We're still talking about the brake upgrades with these vehicles, Nissans and Infinitis, and I think this is going to be, let's just call this part 3. As a recap, when we talked about the Akebono BBK, the sport brake upgrade, we were talking about the advantages and the disadvantages, and the purpose of that video, which I labeled part 2, was to inform you. If you were on the fence as to whether you should do the upgrade, hopefully the information in that video gave you the nudge to go ahead and do it ASAP. On the other hand, if you were leery about doing it, hopefully you got information that helped you see that you would not be missing out on anything if you decided not to do the upgrade. Okay? And at this point, I'm thinking some people would probably, I would have the question that, is this guy telling us to get rid of our BBK, our big brakes, although they came like that from the factory? Absolutely not. I'm not trying to tell you that. If you already have the BBK upgrade, you do not need to downgrade, in quotes, to the base model system. However, I'd like us to acknowledge that the base model brakes do have certain advantages that should not be overlooked. So, on the other hand, I wanted to also inform you that although your vehicle might have come with the BBK from the factory, there are certain downsides to your setup as it is. If you decided to get rid of your BBK and went to a base model system, I wouldn't blame you. More power to you. The whole purpose of these videos is to inform you and make the best of your situation, right? So, again, as a recap, let's talk about the good things that the base brake system can do for you. Number one, the base brakes, they work just fine. If your tires were, you'd be friction limited on the tires at this point. If you slammed on your brakes just, hard enough, you will lock up your brakes and your car's gonna skid, get some smoke, make some noise. So the brakes work just fine. They're not really lacking with regards to braking capacity. My opinion, my professional opinion, should I say, that the big brake kit is mainly for cosmetics, just like you do with the extra large wheels, the 20 and 21-inch wheels. You do not need them, and in fact, whenever Nissan releases vehicles with those large wheels, they usually have base models with 18-inch wheels, and they look just fine. And in this kind of market, looks sell, especially in the luxury segments. In economy vehicles, probably not so much. At least that was true back in the day. Features kind of sell in the lower tier, is what I think. So looks matter a lot. The other point I wanted to make is that Nissan or Infiniti would not release or use brakes that don't function. So the base model brakes work just fine, right? One, brakes are safety items, so you don't play with people's lives. Well, okay, to cat airbags. Okay. Number two, these brakes are actually made by companies whose sole existence is to make brakes. So Nissan isn't exactly a brake manufacturer. They might design and might put out some design specifications or performance targets, but at the end of the day, these brakes are made by people who do nothing but brake work. Okay. Number three, if you think about it, this design has been used by Nissan for such a long time, so it should work, but I'll put an asterisk over here because do you remember that part of the video where I was talking about this rear caliper issue where they always lock up? So yeah, I guess just because I've done it the same way for a long time doesn't mean it's exactly the best thing. And let's go ahead and recap what the positive attributes and what the negative attributes were. Number one, cosmetics. Number two, performance. Number three, maintenance. And we'll break this down a little later. The downsides of the Akebono BBK system was one, cost. Assuming you have functional brakes, you're going to spend some money to get the big brake kit. Number two, installation and complications that come with that. Number three, performance. Again, and I always reiterate that there are many different ways to define performance. Okay, so let's do this. At this point, let's assume this video is not about whether you should do it or not. This video is assuming that the decision has already been made. You either have already decided to upgrade to the larger brakes, or you already own a car that came with the larger brakes from the factory. The question is, I already have the big brake kit. Now what? This is to give you tools on how to live your life with the big break kit. No, really, it's how to make the most of the big break upgrade. What we're trying to do here in this video is we're trying to address the negative effects of the breakings of the larger break upgrade without affecting the positive attributes of the upgrade. At this point, we have no intention to deal with the positives because we have already decided that the positives outweigh the negatives, so we're going to do the upgrade, or we just absolutely had no choice because we bought the car like that. So the first negative thing about the upgrade that we'd like to address is a cost, right? It can be a little expensive depending on how you play with it. The first thing you could do to ease your pain is look for deals. These vendors usually have some offers, sometimes discounts at certain times of the year, so you have to keep your eyes open and just make sure you get things at the right time. And that applies when you're buying something brand new. However, the second option is that you don't have to buy anything new. You could buy used ones, and that comes with a risk. Are they working well? Were they removed properly? Are you going to install them properly? Sometimes having used parts comes with its risk that just compounds. Number three, whenever you decide to do the upgrade, do not replace anything that you can get away with modifying, right? Save you some money. That's simple to understand. The fourth thing I'd suggest is stay focused. Avoid scope creep. Don't just, if you keep going for upgrade after upgrade, I showed you in the previous video that your costs for brand new system could creep up from $1,000 to way over $3,000. And I'm just thinking at this point, I guess I have covered number one and two downsides, the cost and installation, especially the two last, the bottom half of my list over here talks about installation, right? Modifying and basically making sure you install only what you need to do. You'll notice that the above discussion applies for people that are upgrading to the BBK, people who are installing new components, right? But then there are people who do not get any of those choices, people who don't have to do any installation either because the previous owner of your vehicle already did the upgrade for you, or number two, you bought the car just like that and it came from the factory with the sport brakes. So the cost and installation part probably doesn't apply to you, but performance, the negative performance attributes of the upgrade will apply to you. And as a reminder, we have the three performance attributes were one, fuel economy, number two, acceleration, and number three was going to be handling. There was usually an asterisk on that. Okay. So you'll notice that the common factor here is that weight is what is affecting our performance. And remember, what we're trying to do here is to address the negatives, but don't take away any of the positives. So what we want to do is shed the extra weight, but want to keep the diameter, because remember here on the positive side, our biggest contributor to increased performance was the diameter, right? Remember the calculations. But on the negative side, the biggest contributor to poor performance is the weight. So again, these things kind of relate to each other. Let's just keep a note, make a note here that larger diameters always result in better braking, usually. And this was more of a braking moment thing, force times radius. Okay, so we acknowledge that we need to lose weight in some key areas. This is called lightweighting, and it is exactly what it sounds like, getting lighter components whenever you can. The aim for doing this is to reduce unsprung weight, and the best definition I can give for unsprung weight at this point is if you went to your vehicle and pushed down on the hood or the trunk, or you stood in the roof and jumped up and down, made your vehicle bounce, anything that does not go up and down when you do that is unsprung weight. So that's usually that's your rotational stuff, if you think about it. And so I'd also like to mention this thing that usually see in some online discussions. 1 pound in the corner is equals to 10 pounds in the body. Has anyone ever heard that? The principle is sound, but I'm a numbers person, so I'd like to come back to it. 10 pounds sounds really good. Basically, what this says is that for components that rotate or turn whenever you drive, if you shed your weight by 1 pound, it will be equivalent to losing 10 pounds somewhere inside your vehicle. And likewise, if you got wheels that are 1 pound heavy, if you got rotational components that are 1 pound heavier, it's going to feel like you're carrying an extra 10 pounds in your vehicle or in your trunk, in your seat, wherever it is. Basically, your sprung weight. And so we'll come back and talk about that, but for the purpose of our discussion today, the rotational mass that we'll be trying to address will be the tires, and I'll spell it the other way for my people in other parts of the world that use a Y, and the wheels. I suppose we could call it rims, or the brakes. More accurately, the brake rotors or discs. So, what is a weight? What is the kind of weight you could save? Tires really do vary between winter tires, summer tires, performance, run flats, etc. So you could vary your weights between 5 to 10 pounds, just depending on what brand you buy. With wheels, boy, that can get really wild, depending on how large a wheel you get, how it's made. So let me just go with 10 to 15 pounds. I'll use my an example of the wheels that I own. And then when it comes to things like brake rotors, depending on how lucky you get, depending on how much how lucky you get, you could end up losing or yeah, usually with brakes, no one really gets heavier brakes unless you're going larger, right? And I'll show you the numbers below, but 5 to 10 pounds would be reasonable for our discussion. So, what exactly affects tires? Well, the type, like I said, when it comes to wheels, size, and how it's made, forged wheels are going to be lighter. And when it comes to brakes, as I said, you don't really affect it with many different ways unless you got something like two-piece rotors, which are usually lighter. And at this point, you're thinking, well, we're trying to break the rules of physics. Yeah, this is what they say: you cannot bend or you cannot break the rules of physics. If you have to, it's going to cost you. So yes, this stuff costs money. How much money? I'll use an example. I'll use my examples. Depending on what kind of tires you get, maybe $1,000. That's 250 per tire. And for the wheels, this can be wild. You could get wheels that, for free. You could trade wheels, or you could spend $1,000, $3,000, $5,000 wheels. This is crazy. Let's just call it 1 to 3,000. On brakes, the two-piece rotors that I'm referring to, about for $1,400 is what it costs. Well, at this point, for all intents and purposes, we're done. I have provided all the basic information that should help you make the most of your Akebono BBK. But I think this discussion could be a little better if we had some real-world examples. And I'm going to provide one such example. I'm going to use my own vehicle, a 2008 INFINITI M45, which I've shown in previous videos that I did the Akebono upgrade to. I'll give you a brief timeline of how this went down. Okay. From the factory, the car came with base model brakes, which worked just fine. They were due for replacement, actually just the pads, but I decided to go ahead and upgrade to the larger brake system. So it cost me a little bit of money. Not too much, as I said. I was going to do something, but instead of just replacing the pads, or maybe the pads and the rotors, I decided to get a whole new system. Okay, that's fine. Why did I do that? Well, one, was cosmetic. There was a cosmetic angle to it. But two, I was also doing this for science. Like 2, 3, 4 years ago, I did all that knowing I was going to do this video. Isn't that dedicated? So number three, the third thing I did in the timeline is that after realizing that there were some downsides to this BBK thing that I really wanted to do something about, I decided to do something to correct the bad effects. And at this point, I was really kind of fighting science, and as I said, whenever you try to bend or break the rules of physics, scientific principles, it's going to cost you some money. So at this point, I'm spending a little more, because now I'm trying to correct and do whatever it is that I did. Okay. This one's going to have a lot of numbers, so I hope you guys don't mind numbers. It's for people that like seeing examples. Let me show you the decisions I made. I have like 8 different options or 8 different decisions to be made over here. What I'm going to do is take the different components that I installed over the years and the different ones that I'm considering and what they should do. So I had the 2008 M45 as it came. Whenever I did my upgrade, I used wheels from an M56. I've got wheels from a 370Z. Well, I've got other wheels from another different type of 370 Nissan 370Z, and then I've got GTR wheels. So in this one, what we're going to work on is show you the effect of lightweighting, or at least the options that I have for lightweighting. And maybe I won't go through all the, well, maybe I will go through all the numbers. So what I'm listing first is the original, the wheel specs that I have. It's it's all happening at the same time, but it's just simpler to list the wheels and to list the diameter times the width and then how much each wheel weighs. You'll notice over here that the factory wheel, the original wheel, 26 pounds, that's pretty light, right? Not too bad. But then when I did the upgrade, I got these heavy wheels, and I've always been the first to admit that I kind of shot myself in the foot because my fuel economy tanked by about 2 miles a gallon, but I got some really heavy wheels, right? About 6 pounds heavier each corner. Maybe we'll come back to it. Then I'm looking at these other wheels, and the 370Z Sport has staggered wheels, so the front wheels are narrower than the rear. 9 inches versus 10, and these are the weights: 23 pounds versus 24 pounds. They're forged, that's why. Then we've got other 19-inch wheels, a different kind of wheel. This one's a kind of heavy, although they're a little wider, 25 pounds. It's not too far off from the original one. Then the wider wheel in the rear, 26 pounds. It's like really close to the original M45 wheel. And then the Nissan GTR, actually, I've got so many different wheels for the GTR, but when you get the staggered set, the front wheel is 20 by 9.5 inches wide. The rear wheel is 10.5 inches wide. Take note, this is 20 inches, but the weight of the front wheel is only 26 pounds. Huge difference if you compare it to the M56 wheel. All right. Again, these are forged wheels. That's how we can make him this light. Okay, so let's kind of relate why we're even doing the numbers. We're trying to work on this statement that 1 pound in the corner is equals 10 pounds in the body. The principle, as I said, is sound. What you're trying to do is evaluate a principle of equivalent mass, in that if it's rotating, it's going to feel a little heavier. And that's sound science right there. It's the numbers that we're not really sure of. So off the screen, I'm going to do calculations, and what my calculation is telling us is that if you have something that weighs 26 pounds and it's 19 inches in diameter, 8.5 inches wide, and there's some very few assumptions. Generally, this is going to feel like you have 38.8 pounds in the body of the vehicle. And if you have 32.6 pounds, that's going to feel like 50.6. Huge jump, right? I said it's not just 6 pounds lighter, 6 pounds heavier. At this point now you see that the difference is closer to 12, right? Doubles it up, right? Okay. The 370Z wheel that I'm looking at, the equivalent mass is like 34.7. It's much lighter than the original one. That's cool. And the other one is 36.8. So although it's wider, because of the total mass and different mathematical breakdowns, ends up being lighter than the original 38.8. Okay, great. The other wheels, which were a little heavier, you'll realize that those end up being pretty much the same. The rear wheel is going to be just a little heavier, the equivalent mass, but not too bad. And then, so we've got these 20-inch wheels from the GTR. The front one, it weighed 26.6 pounds, but when you break it down, whenever you do the calculation, it feels like 41.2. So two things. It's interesting in that the weight itself was just 26.6, but what it actually ends up feeling like is way more than the original M45 wheel, right? And then the rear wheel over here is like 42. And as I said, it's pretty crazy that they're 20-inch wheels, just like the M56 wheel, but their equivalent weights end up being really low. Okay, so let's label this section. This was the wheels. We're going to go ahead and do this for the tires as well. And for the tires, what I did here was that I was trying to see if I used the original wheel, what size tire would I use? 245 4019, which is a factory one. If I used, well, this is actually what I did with the M56 wheel. What kind of tire did I use? 255 35 20. Great. If I went for the 370Z Sport wheel, what size of tire? I would end up using a 255 40, so not too different over there. For the rear, I'd use a 285 35. And for the other type, again, it's a 19 by 9, just like the other one, but I just wanted to play with a different size tires, so that's why I used the 275 35. And then we have a 265 35, perfect rolling diameter on that one. On the GTR wheels, I used 255 35, just like the M56 wheel, but the rear wheel is so wide at 10.5 inches that I would use 285 by 30. Okay, and at this point I'm going to jump on to Tire Rack website. I'm going to try to find I'm going to try to find tires in these sizes, and I generally like using Continental tires. I like them to look good, so we'll go for DWSs. And what I'm looking for is, again, thank you to Tire Rack. They give you information, the specs as to how much each tire weighs, and then we'll go ahead and write down the actual tire weights. I feel like there's a little bit of rounding going on here, but hey, we're not launching our cars into space. I think we can allow a little bit of error, right? So again, with this one, I'm going to go ahead and do my calculation. We're trying to find the equivalent weights, and a tire that's 24 pounds and of that size tire profile feels like 46.5 pounds in the body. 24 feels like 46.7, etc, etc. Keep going here. So now I'll pause here. Do you realize that what's funny is that the 20-inch tire, the tire that you use on the 20-inch wheel, isn't that crazily heavy at this point, right? It's yeah, math can be interesting, really. So the 255 40 felt like, if I bought that exact size, that exact brand, there are some tires out there that are going to be a little lighter, obviously, or heavier. It just depends on what you do. But as I said, for me, I'm trying to keep the comparison as fair as possible, apples to apples. So all Continental DWS06, and these are the weights that they give me. Break it down all the way to the end. So the surprising thing here, surprising or not surprising, is that the the wheel, when it comes to the rotating masses, the M56 wheel was the heaviest wheel, but with regards to the tire that you end up using on it, it's not that bad, right? So you should always play with those total sums. You don't just look at a light wheel, but you don't take the weight of the tire that you're going to end up using into consideration, right? I'll add a different number here because when it comes to tire choices, especially when I had almost similar tire sizes, something else comes at you. The prices. Remember, I estimated that it would cost me $1,000 to get the tires. Well, yeah, you could get them probably cheaper or way more expensive. Just depends on what size tire you book and how much it ends up costing you. So some of these sizes cost more. Yeah, it is what it is. So sometimes that ends up, driving your decision, and the ease of replacement. If you popped a tire, do you have to wait for a tire rack to ship it to you, or can you just drive into any shop and have them replace it for you, right? These decisions kind of matter. And finally, we're going to talk about the third rotational component that we can affect, which is the brakes, brake discs, because everything else is fixed. And here we only have three categories because I only have three options for brakes: the stock Infinity M45 brakes, or the Akebono upgrade, which I used rotors, and I used a setup from an Infinity G37 Sport, or the lightweight option, in which I use the two-piece rotors, which would call Akebono point 2 or BBK point 2. And here we're going to categorize it a little further as front and rear, because they not only have different diameters, but they also have different weights. But maybe this is the point I should reintroduce the two-piece rotors as to for people who haven't seen the other videos, or people who are not really familiar with what the two-piece rotors are about. The two-piece rotors aim to shave some weight off by using aluminum wherever you don't absolutely have to use steel. So the middle is going to be a little lighter. You bolt the rotor and the head together. And remember that thing we talked about, I've mentioned it previously, that when it comes to metals, as long as the shape is uniform, as long as when you make the diameter or the radius get larger, usually you're going to take a penalty for weight as well. So this might be an interesting one to look at. Okay, so I weighed the rotors. The front rotor from the M45, the stock one, would be, and these are brand new by the way, 21.45 pounds. The G37 rotor would be 7 pounds heavier, which is 28.89. Anyone take any guesses as to what this other one's going to be? 20 pounds, surprisingly, right? Despite it being larger than the original, the stock M45 rotor, it ends up weighing a little less. And we're going to dance in this interesting, I guess, tangle between diameter and weight, and you'll see what happens to it. Okay, so we're going to weigh the rears as well. 12.98. Then I took a 7-pound, give or take, penalty. And any guesses as to what the two-piece rotor is going to be? I'll tell you, 15 pounds. So again, talking about that interesting dance between weight and diameter, as there wasn't that much to the diameter jumped more significantly in the rear of the Akebono system. The front system did not really change in diameter that drastically, but the rears, yeah, the number was pretty high. So as much as you've got lightweight rotors, at the end of the day, they're way larger, so your weight is going to be to follow you all the way there. You'll take a weight penalty. All right, so let's note that down. Diameter versus weight, we'll come back to it. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that magical calculation to find the equivalent weights. Basically, what is my 21.45 pound disc rotor, brake rotor, going to feel like as an equivalent weight inside my trunk or in my cabin, right? Here are the numbers. 23.62 pounds. Not much of a difference, is it? Then here it's 31.53. Not too dramatic either. Any guesses for what 20 is going to be? Do you think it's going to be like 22 or 23? Okay, here's the answer. 23.74. So not too crazy, right? Again, despite the weight over here, you'll notice that the 23.74, although this two-piece rotor is a little lighter, actually much lighter than the stock rotor, its equivalent mass is actually much heavier. Well, it's just slightly heavier or equal to the original rotor. Again, diameter versus weight. You're going to always have to balance those out. And for the rear, we have our numbers as well. Equivalent weights are going to be 14.16 here, jump of barely 2, and 21.93, barely 2, and then here 17.77, a little over 2. So the numbers are kind of small here, but again, the principle kind of remains in that whenever you have a larger rotor, again, diameter, right? the effects of equivalent weight are going to be just a little more pronounced. Again, diameter versus weight. Okay, now let's go back to the whole point where we're doing this lightweighting. We heard that 1 pound or 1 unit of weight or mass in the corner is equals to 10 units of weight in the body. Basically, 1 pound is equals 10, 1 kilogram is equals 10 kilograms. Does that still hold water? Well, let's go look at the numbers. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and divide. I'm going to divide, for example, 38.8 divide by 26. What's the answer here? 1.5, 1.55, 1.5, 1.55, 5555. Okay, that's interesting. We'll keep that in mind. Let's do the same thing for the tires. Divide 46.5, divide the equivalent weight versus the actual weight. And what are the answers here? 1.94, 1.95, 94, 94, 94, 94, 95, and 95. You can go ahead and check my math if you want to. And we're going to do the same for the brakes, for the brake rotors. 23.62 divided by 21.45. And the answer is going to be 1.1, 1.09, let's just call that 1.1, and here it's going to be 1.19. Interesting. You notice how much more this one is pronounced? Diameter, man, diameter always gets you. And on the rear, what we have is 1.09, 1.13, and 1.18. Again, the heavier you go, obviously, the more the effect, and the larger the diameter is, again, the heavier the effect. And these are the laws of physics. You just can't break them. Okay, let's go back up there. 1 pound in the corner is equals to 10 pounds in the body. Ratio of 1 to 10. Nope. We have debunked this. Well, let me come here and kind of equate. I'll give you some rules of thumb. This is what the actual ratios usually are. For wheels, it's 1 to like 1.6. That's a good approximation. For tires, it's going to be 1 to becomes 2. Okay, so basically double it up. And for brakes, it's usually, at most, you get something like 1.2. And as I said, without changing anything else, changing diameter, it's tough to get heavier brakes. But lightweighting, you're going to be lightweighting it with a factor of 1.2. And then these are all approximations. Tires are going to be a little interesting because, again, most people don't really look at tires, and tires, I don't know. As I said, a lot of decisions go into tires, What kind of season, what kind of surfaces are you driving on? What kind of tires do you get? What brand? Do you have brand loyalty? Or are you getting wider tires? Those things kind of end up changing it all. Or are you just buying the cheapest tires you can get? And there are those fuel saver tires out in the market, right? So that's usually an interesting one. Well, complications aside, I suppose I have to report the numbers exactly like the calculator gave them to me. So, if you were serious about doing any lightweighting, the very first component I'd be looking at would be the tires, followed by the wheels, and if you still have any room in your budget, then I'd do something to address the brakes. And that is why I wrote this list in this order: tires, wheels, then brakes. And I'm going to court some controversy here. Brakes, brake rotors. With a conversion factor of about 1.2, that is on the top end. As you can see in my examples, it's less than that. Is it really worth it to do the brakes? I mean, they're already pretty light, so 1.1, 1.2 of a very light component, and especially for the cost, that is something crazy. And I'm saying this because sometimes people do this in good faith, and I can't blame anyone for not knowing or for not analyzing the modifications to the levels that I do, right? After all, that's the job that I do here. But sometimes people do this modification. They get two-piece rotors for weight savings, but then they combine that with other modifications that they do to their driveline, like getting wider wheels, larger wheels, wider tires, and without knowing, they increase their total rotational weight, the equivalent weight. Yes, you're saving 3 pounds is 3 pounds, and savings is savings, right? We can't take that away from you, but you end up penalizing yourself by all the other things that you do as improvement modifications, that your net reduction is negative. Basically, you end up gaining weight, gaining equivalent weight in the name of trying to reduce weight. But I've always said, if cosmetics is your main driver, go for it. Let's not even talk about it. So, someone might look at my timeline here and say, okay, you had perfectly functioning brakes, right? Yes. Then you upgraded to the BBK, right? Yes. And now you even went ahead and got two-piece rotors because you're trying to correct the effects of BBK. Yes, I did that too. And so if you knew all of this, why did you even bother spending the money and the time to do this? And that's a really good question. And there's a two-part answer to this. One, I I didn't know exactly. I had a hunch, I had a gut feeling, and in my discipline, I have to go with a scientific method. Basically, I write a hypothesis, I make an educated guess, that's what it is, and then I have to prove it. You can bet that I wasn't going to get these numbers, or I wasn't going to get this type of breakdown, this type of analysis from people who sell two-piece rotors. No, I had to buy them for myself to go ahead and prove the numbers. And the second reason why do I do this? I did this for you guys. As customary of most of my videos, this one is going to have a bonus section as well. In this one, I intend to condense all the theoretical information we've been discussing in the past half hour or so. I will tell you what my actual decisions were, what I actually did to my vehicle, and hopefully what the outcomes of these decisions ended up being. For that, I'm going to go into a chart-like format. I will divide my discussion into 3 columns, which will be representative of the timeline and what I did. Where I had the stock system, I went for the big brake upgrade and then big brake upgrade version 2. And on the row side, I'm going to show the rotational components, and I will start with the one that has the highest effect on equivalent mass. So start with the tires, go to the wheels, and then go to the brakes. For the brakes, obviously, the front and the rear rotors have different dimensions and different weights, so we'll break it down a little further here. And I'll get started with the wheels because I think this is the one component that most people would try to change. It's the one thing that most people usually change, and it's the one thing that people usually know that I'm either getting lighter weight or heavier weight. People don't really know or pay attention to much of the other stuff like tires. So let's start with wheels. The stock INFINITI M45 Sport wheel was a 19-inch by 8.5 wide wheel. The M56 Sport one was 20 by 9, and I'm going to use a 19 by 9. I suppose at this point I should kind of label it up there. Stock, BBK part 1, and then BBK part 2, reloaded. Feels like it should be unloaded because I'm actually shaving weight. Alright, well, I tickled myself. Let's keep going. You gotta have fun, man, you know? So let's label these. This one came from the INFINITI M45 Sport. This one came from the INFINITI M56 Sport. And then this one is going to come from a Nissan 370Z Sport. Let's note down the weights as measured by me. This one here is 26 pounds. And I should probably note it here that all units are going to be in standard units. All measurements are going to be in standard units. So this one is 32.6, 23.2, and the stock tire for the INFINITI M45 Sport was 245/40/19. When I made the change to keep the speedometer accurate, I went for 255, 35, and 20. And then I'm going to make a change. When I make the change, I'm going to go for 255, 40, and 19. Here are the weights, 24, 24, and 26. So already someone is probably looking at this thinking, why would you make it wider and heavier? 2 reasons. I kind of hinted at it when I talked about doing a proper analysis. Yes, I'm getting wider wheels and wider tires, but I'm doing this because one, the wider tires is for better traction, better handling. I'm trying to regain handling and also possibly improve my handling. And then I mentioned this about tires. There are many reasons or many different decisions, many considerations that go into purchasing tires. How easy is it going to be to get the tire that you want? And this one here, the 370Z actually offered a different wheel and tire, or at least a wider wheel in the rear, but I chose to stick with just same size front wheels. These are going to be the front wheels, just so that whenever it comes to buying tires and rotating tires, it's going to be that much easier. Plus, the Infiniti M45 seems to lend itself well to square setups. It just seems to look better and sit better that way. Oh well, let's move on. The brakes for the stock system, remember these measurements were taken on brand new rotors: 21.45, 12.98, 28.89, 19.47, 20, and 15. And now we're going to go to that beast, equivalent weights. That is the whole purpose of us doing this video today, all right? So let's do that in blue here. This one breaks down to 46.5. This one is 46.7. So I didn't really change much of the tires. And I'm going to go to 50.3. It's a little heavier. It's fine. As I said, we'll break this down all the way to the end. Then on the wheels, we have 38.8, 50.6. This one is 34.7. I like how it's breaking down so far. My wheels were so heavy. All my current wheels are so heavy. On the brakes, we have 23.62, 14.16. Not too much of a difference there, right? And then we jump to 31.53, 21.93. It's interesting if you try to look at the patterns just from the front rotor from stock to phase one, and then you look at the differences between the front and the rear rotors. Okay, let's jump on 23 by 17. Okay. So now at this point, what we're going to do is compare. I'll get my totals, and the totals are going to be, I'm going to use equivalent weights. Since the wheels and tires are the same, I'm going to use the same wheels and tires in the calculation, but then when it comes to the brakes, I will consider the front rotors individually, right? And so the calculation is going to be tire plus wheel plus front brake. This one is 108.92. And for the rear, it's going to be, oh, scratch that, it's 99.46. Repeat the same on phase one, and this is what I am actually writing on right now. 128.83, 119.23. And then what I'm going to go for is going to be 108.74, 102.77. Right here, it's pretty interesting if you look at it, right? Although we had heavier tires, we had way lighter wheels, and the brakes were pretty much the same. So here it ends up breaking down to be the same or slightly less in the front. For the rear, we increased both the rotor size and the weight, so there was really no catching up to the original one. But as you can see, it's not too crazy. That's a very slight difference. And so I will get my total sum, and my total sum is going to be adding up the fronts, just multiply the front by 2 and the rear by 2, and my total equivalent weight for my original setup was 416.76. And maybe right here, let me pause and explain what this number is and what it's supposed to even represent. One, if I had no wheels, no tires or brakes, my equivalent weight on the body was going to be 0. But because of what I put on, I had just the wheels that came from the factory was like carrying around 416 pounds in the trunk of the vehicle. And when I made the change, I went to 496.12 and I gained like 80 pounds in the body. So that's the kind of stuff that was affecting my fuel economy and acceleration type stuff, and handling a little bit too. And what I'm going to go for is 423.02. This is pretty cool because my total isn't that different. What it's saying is that after making all these different changes, it's going to be like I only added 7 pounds into the vehicle. And again, just a recap why we're doing this and why the timeline happened in the first place. I am trying to make changes so that I can regain my performance, and my performance was fuel economy, acceleration, and handling, right? And when you look at these numbers, I can't give you the fuel economy outcome yet. You'll probably need to give me 2 years, which is the amount of time I needed after making this first change from stock to phase one to be able to tell you that, yeah, my fuel economy was affected by 2 miles per gallon, but the acceleration and the handling, that was immediate. And I expect right now to get the feeling, get my acceleration and handling back immediately. Fuel economy would have to touch base in 2 years or so. At this point in the video, I trust that there are people who've been following along, listening to the things that I've been saying, tracking the numbers that I've been sharing, that is the costs as well as the weights, and then come to the end of the video, they'll look at the similarities here, and they would probably be justified to ask me this question. Do you mean to tell me that you spent $3,000 to make your car accelerate, handle, and perform exactly the way it came from the factory? Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy when you put it like that, but all I can say is, hey, at least it looks better, right? But I think this is one of those discussions that people usually have with regards to modifications, and people claim that for the most part they're improving something. It depends on whether, I'm not going to say no, it's not true. I think it depends on how exactly you describe better. Is it looks? Is it handling solely? Is it what exactly are you making modifications for? It's funny that after all these changes, of course, my modifications are going to be kind of conservative here, but at the end of the day, the car ends up doing exactly what it came from the factory doing, you know? There is some respect that needs to be accorded to the people that design and produce these vehicles.